In the early morning of July 2, 1937, the sky above the Pacific stretched like an endless canvas of blue and gold. A silver twin-engine plane sliced through the air, carrying with it the hopes of one of the world's most celebrated aviators. Amelia Earhart, the daring woman who had already shattered barriers and rewritten the history of aviation, was in the cockpit alongside her navigator Fred Noonan. Together they were attempting something no woman and very few men had ever dared before, a flight around the entire globe at its widest point. But somewhere over the vast Pacific Ocean, silence descended. The radio crackled with faint calls, then grew quiet. The plane was never seen again. This disappearance was not just the vanishing of a person, it was the birth of a legend. Earhart's name had already become a beacon for those who dreamed of breaking boundaries, but her sudden vanishing transformed her from a celebrated pilot into an eternal enigma. What happened in those final hours above the water? Was it a tragic accident, a navigational error that plunged her into the sea? Or was there something deeper, perhaps involving secret missions, hidden islands, or even government cover-ups? The unanswered questions turned her story into one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. Amelia Earhart was more than a pilot. She was a symbol of courage in an age when women were told to stay grounded. She pushed herself into the skies not for glory alone, but to prove that no boundary could hold back determination and skill. From the day she first lifted off the ground, she seemed destined for greatness. And yet, the same skies that gave her wings also swallowed her without a trace. Tonight, we step into that mystery. We trace the life of Amelia, her rise to international fame, her groundbreaking achievements, and her final fateful flight. We will fall. Long before her disappearance would grip the world in mystery, Amelia Earhart was already shaping herself into a figure larger than life. Born in Atchison, Kansas in 1897, Amelia grew up restless and curious. Unlike many girls of her era, she was not content with dolls or quiet drawing rooms. She climbed trees, hunted rats with a rifle, and collected newspaper clippings of women who achieved feats in fields dominated by men. From an early age, she displayed the qualities that would later define her career: boldness, independence, and a refusal to let society dictate her path. Her fascination with flying was sparked in 1920 when she attended an air show in Long Beach, California. She paid a small fee to ride in a biplane, and as the craft lifted above the earth, she felt a transformation. As soon as we left the ground, she would later recall, "I knew I had to fly." That moment became the ignition of a lifelong passion. Within a year, she was taking lessons, working odd jobs to afford the costs. By 1922, she set her first record, becoming the first woman to fly to 14,000 feet. This was only the beginning. The late 1920s brought her into the global spotlight. In 1928, Amelia was chosen to accompany pilot Wilmer Stultz and mechanic Louis Gordon across the Atlantic Ocean. Though she was only a passenger, her arrival in England made headlines. She was hailed as the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air. Reporters swarmed her, and newspapers called her Lady Lindy, a nod to Charles Lindbergh. Yet Amelia herself was uneasy with the fame, insisting she had done little but sit in the plane. Still, the public had found its heroine, and she embraced the opportunity to inspire. In 1932, she silenced all doubts by doing it alone. On May 20th, she lifted off from Newfoundland in H. By 1937, Amelia Earhart stood at the pinnacle of her career. She had already conquered the skies over the Atlantic, traversed the American continent, and broken altitude and speed records that once seemed unreachable. Yet she felt one last challenge remained, one final feat that would etch her name forever into history. To fly around the world, not just by any route but along its widest circumference, near the equator where the distance stretched longest and the conditions proved harshest. It would be the most ambitious flight attempted by any aviator of her generation. Planning such a journey required meticulous preparation. Her aircraft, a Lockheed Model 10E Electra, was specially modified for long-distance travel. Extra fuel tanks were installed to give it the range needed for vast ocean crossings. Navigation equipment was fitted, though by modern standards it was still primitive. Amelia would not attempt this alone. She enlisted Fred Noonan, a skilled navigator who had experience guiding Pan American Airways, flying boats across the Pacific. His knowledge of celestial navigation and vast oceans was vital to the mission. The flight began in March, but a first attempt failed due to mechanical damage during takeoff from Hawaii. Amelia was shaken, but undeterred. After repairs and renewed planning, she launched again in June, this time flying eastward. The new route took her from Miami to South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, then over India and Southeast Asia. At every stop, crowds gathered to glimpse the famous aviator, cheering her on as she logged thousands of miles. Letters and telegrams poured in from admirers across the globe. Amelia's journey became not just a personal challenge, but a world spectacle. By the time she reached Lae, New Guinea, she and Noonan had already completed nearly 22,000 miles. Only one stretch remained. As the Lockheed Electra pushed deeper into the Pacific skies, the only connection Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had with the outside world was their radio. The Coast Guard cutter Itasca waited near Howland Island, engines idling, operators straining at their receivers for signs of the famous aviator. At first, messages did come through, faint but clear enough to track. Amelia reported weather conditions, altitude, and progress. Yet as the hours wore on, signals began to falter. Static dominated the airwaves, and what words did break through were often incomplete or garbled, leaving uncertainty about their true position. One of the challenges lay in the technology of the time. Amelia's Electra was equipped with a 250-watt transmitter, powerful enough for short messages but limited by range and atmospheric interference. The vastness of the Pacific created further difficulties, with signals bouncing or fading unpredictably. To make matters worse, coordination of frequencies between her aircraft and the Itasca was not properly aligned. At times, the ship heard Amelia, but she could not hear their replies. This one-sided communication deepened the crisis. Fred Noonan's navigation relied heavily on celestial fixes, reading the positions of stars and sun to calculate their route. But clouds drifted thick across the skies, obscuring much of the view. Without precise readings, his calculations carried the risk of error. Amelia's transmissions reflected growing unease. At one point she declared, "We must be on you but cannot see you." Those words, thin with static, suggested they were near Howland, yet unable to spot the tiny island below. The phrase captured both their hope and their desperation. As hours stretched, the tone of her voice betrayed increasing anxiety. She reported fuel running low, her words edged with urgency. "We are running north and south," she said in another transmission, a chilling sign that she and Noonan were searching blindly over the empty ocean. On the Itasca, operators tried frantically to respond, blasting signals back, even sending smoke from the ship's stacks as a visual beacon, yet Amelia never confirmed seeing it. The last recognized message came around 8:45 a.m. Her voice, faint and strained, announced that fuel was nearly exhausted. After that, silence fell across the frequencies. The ship continued calling out, its operators unwilling to surrender, but nothing answered. Somewhere in that vast stretch of water, Amelia and Fred had vanished from the sky. The disappearance was not immediately accepted as final. In those moments after the last call, hope lingered that perhaps the Electra had managed to land on some nearby atoll or glide into a safe ditching. The Itasca crew searched the horizon desperately, but the ocean remained indifferent and empty. Those final broken transmissions became the last known trace of Amelia Earhart, fragments of sound carried on static, a fading echo swallowed by the immensity of the Pacific. When Amelia Earhart's voice fell silent on the radio, the realization of possible disaster began to spread rapidly. The Coast Guard cutter Itasca, stationed near Howland Island, instantly shifted from guiding to searching. Its crew scanned the horizon for any glimpse of the silver Electra, releasing plumes of smoke to mark its position and setting full power to begin a sweeping patrol. Yet nothing appeared on the empty ocean. Within hours, a coordinated rescue effort was underway, one of the largest peacetime searches the United States had ever attempted. President Franklin Roosevelt authorized the Navy to join in, and soon ships and aircraft were deployed across thousands of miles of ocean. Battleships, destroyers, and aircraft carriers participated, their decks crowded with sailors peering through binoculars. Aircraft soared low over the waves, flying grid patterns to spot debris or signs of life. The scale was immense, covering an area comparable to the size of Texas. The public, still unaware of the full gravity of the situation, read headlines with growing anxiety. Newspapers that once celebrated Amelia's daring now carried stories of hope tempered with fear. Days passed, and yet no evidence emerged. The Navy concentrated efforts on the Phoenix Islands group, believing Amelia and Noonan might have tried to land there. Gardner Island, today known as Nikumaroro, was inspected by aircraft, and crews thought they saw signs of habitation, perhaps recent activity. But when closer inspection was attempted, little was confirmed. Supplies were dropped in hope that survivors might collect them, but no response came. The silence was crushing. Meanwhile, radio operators across the Pacific claimed to pick up distress signals faintly echoing from unknown sources. Some believed they were hearing Amelia herself, trying to reach anyone who might listen. Static filled most transmissions, but fragments of words seemed to call for help. Skeptics argued these were false signals, the result of atmospheric interference or hoaxes, yet others held on to hope that the legendary pilot was still alive, stranded somewhere awaiting rescue. These reports fueled the public imagination, but they never led to conclusive discovery. After 2 weeks of relentless searching, the official mission was scaled down. The Navy had spent millions of dollars and countless hours, but the Pacific yielded no answers. With heavy hearts, officials announced the likelihood that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had been lost at sea. For many, however, the lack of wreckage or definitive evidence left doubt. Could a plane simply vanish without leaving even a trace of debris? This question haunted both experts and ordinary people alike. The search ended officially in July 1937, but the mystery was only beginning to grow. The abrupt silence, the faint reports of possible signals, and the absence of physical evidence created fertile ground for speculation. Historians, researchers, and conspiracy theorists alike would spend decades trying to explain what the Pacific had hidden. Amelia Earhart's disappearance was no longer just a tragic event. It was transforming into one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern history. When official search efforts closed without answers, the most straightforward explanation emerged as the dominant theory: that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan simply ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific Ocean. With her last radio message indicating she was nearly empty, this conclusion felt logical. Yet even such a simple answer raised its own mysteries. Why was no wreckage ever found? Could a large aircraft vanish entirely without leaving floating debris or oil slicks? Oceanographers argue that the Pacific around Howland Island is one of the most remote and unforgiving regions on Earth. Its depths plunge thousands of feet, making recovery nearly impossible with the technology of the 1930s. Even today, modern searches with advanced sonar and remotely operated vehicles have failed to locate the Electra. The vastness of the seafloor, combined with shifting currents, may mean the plane lies in a place that is simply unreachable. In this way, the ocean itself became both the stage and the vault of the mystery. Still, doubts persist. Some experts point to Amelia's radio transmissions as evidence that she was closer to land than many believe. If she had indeed been circling near Howland, why was no visual contact ever made with the Itasca? Others suggest her navigation may have carried her miles off course, leading to empty ocean with no hope of landfall. In either case, the crash at sea theory remains the most widely accepted, yet it is also the most frustratingly inconclusive. Over the years, several expeditions have attempted to prove this version of events. Organizations like the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, known as TIGAR, launched searches with sophisticated equipment, mapping seafloors and investigating sonar anomalies. Time and again, promising leads ended in disappointment. Each failure deepened the enigma. Could the AI or craft truly hide so perfectly? Or had searchers been looking in the wrong place all along? This uncertainty has given birth to countless alternative theories, each with its supporters and evidence both compelling and questionable. Some insist Amelia made it to a nearby island. Others whisper of secret missions, while a few even suggest she survived under another identity. These competing narratives keep her mystery alive nearly a century later. And here is where I want to pause and ask you directly. If you were in Amelia's place, facing empty skies, low fuel, and a vast ocean with no land in sight, what would you do? Would you continue north and south searching for a speck of island, or risk ditching into the water in hope of survival? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective might be closer to the truth than we imagine. While many accept the possibility of a crash at sea, others believe Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan may have survived their flight, only to face a crueler fate. This idea, known as the Castaway theory, suggests that instead of plunging into the ocean, they managed to land on a remote island. The leading candidate is Nikumaroro, once called Gardner Island, part of the Phoenix Islands group. Located a few hundred miles southeast of Howland, it fits within the range of their aircraft and lines up with Amelia's final reported position. Supporters of this theory point to intriguing pieces of evidence. In 1940, a British officer stationed on the island discovered human bones, part of a skull and several other fragments, along with a sextant box and remnants of shoes. At the time, the bones were examined but judged to belong to a male. Decades later, new forensic analysis of the original measurements suggested they could in fact have been consistent with a tall European woman. Unfortunately, the bones themselves were lost, leaving only reports behind. This uncertainty fuels speculation. TIGAR, the research group dedicated to solving Earhart's mystery, has conducted multiple expeditions to Nikumaroro. They uncovered artifacts such as pieces of aluminum, possible parts of an aircraft, a fragment of glass thought to be from a plane window, and evidence of makeshift camps. One of the most striking finds was a broken cosmetic jar, believed to be from a brand Amelia was known to use. These clues, while not definitive, paint an eerie picture of survival. Did Amelia and Fred land their plane on the reef, only to struggle as castaways in a hostile environment? The island itself is unforgiving, surrounded by sharp coral, lacking fresh water, and exposed to brutal heat. Survival there would have been desperate. Accounts from early settlers speak of finding unusual remains, and signs of fires, possibly left behind by unknown survivors. Some modern researchers even argue that certain distress calls heard in the days after Amelia's disappearance may have come from a stranded Electra. Its radio powered intermittently before the tide swept the plane away. Despite this, skeptics challenge the Castaway theory. No conclusive wreckage of the Electra has ever been found on Nikumaroro, and many of the supposed artifacts could have arrived from other sources, such as military aircraft or passing ships. Still, the island continues to captivate researchers. Every expedition that uncovers even a small fragment adds fuel to the possibility that Amelia's final days were not in the open sea, but on a lonely atoll, awaiting rescue that never came. The haunting image of one of history's greatest aviators, stranded and fading into obscurity on a remote island, resonates deeply. It shifts her story from a sudden disappearance to a slow tragedy, one in which hope lingered only to dissolve with each passing tide. Beyond the ideas of a crash at sea or survival as castaways lies one of the most debated and controversial possibilities: that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were captured. This theory suggests their Electra, running low on fuel and lost in the Pacific, diverted toward the Marshall Islands, then under Japanese control. According to this narrative, they either landed or crash-landed there, falling into the hands of Japanese authorities at a time of mounting tensions before World War II. The capture theory gained traction in the 1940s and 50s, fueled by accounts from islanders who claimed to have seen a foreign woman and man held by Japanese soldiers. Some stories described a plane landing near Jaluit Atoll or Mili Atoll, followed by the arrest of its crew. Over time, these oral testimonies were repeated, shaping the belief that Amelia and Fred did not perish at sea, but became prisoners. One piece of evidence often cited is a controversial photograph, unearthed in the 1930s National Archives decades later, showing a group of people on a dock in the Marshall Islands. Among them are a tall, short-haired woman facing away from the camera and a man seated near her. Supporters argue these figures match the appearances of Amelia and Fred. However, skeptics dismiss the photo, claiming the individuals could easily be others and that the dating of the photograph remains disputed. Other rumors tell of Japanese military ships transporting a captured plane, and of Earhart being taken first to Saipan, where she allegedly died in custody. American servicemen stationed in the Pacific during the war reported hearing whispers of a foreign woman pilot held prisoner. These accounts, though dramatic, lack physical confirmation. No official Japanese records mention Amelia Earhart, and no material proof of her plane has surfaced in the Marshalls or Saipan. Still, the capture theory persists because it fits the broader context of global politics. In 1937, relations between Japan and the United States were strained, with the Pacific a growing theater of tension. If Amelia had indeed strayed into Japanese territory, authorities may have treated her not as a stranded aviator, but as a spy. This possibility gives the story a darker twist, moving it from tragedy to international intrigue. For many researchers, the capture theory remains difficult to dismiss entirely, because too many testimonies, though fragmented, echo the same story. Whether these were confusions, fabrications, or genuine recollections is debated fiercely. What is certain is that the image of Amelia Earhart as a prisoner casts a haunting shadow. Instead of disappearing into the ocean, her life may have ended quietly behind barred walls, erased not by waves, but by secrecy. While the crash at sea, castaway, and capture scenarios dominate the conversation, Amelia Earhart's disappearance has also inspired a host of alternative theories. Some are grounded in fragments of evidence, others stretch into the realm of myth, yet all reveal how deeply the mystery has captured imagination. One of the more unusual ideas is the so-called Tokyo Rose theory, which claims Amelia survived and was forced to broadcast propaganda for Japan during World War II. Proponents argue her voice could be heard in certain recordings, but linguists and historians dismiss this, noting no credible evidence links her to such broadcasts. The story persists, however, as a reflection of how iconic her voice and image had become. Another hypothesis paints Amelia as a secret agent. According to this narrative, her world flight was a cover for a U.S. intelligence mission to spy on Japanese military activity in the Pacific. Supporters point to her connections with government officials and the strange secrecy that surrounded certain aspects of her disappearance. If her mission was indeed covert, her capture would explain why official records remain elusive. Yet this idea remains speculation, with no declassified documents proving it. More imaginative theories drift into the impossible. Some claim Amelia lived under a new identity in the United States after the war, pointing to a woman named Irene Bolam who bore a passing resemblance. In the 1970s, this claim reached headlines, with books suggesting Bolam was in fact Earhart. She denied it, even filing a lawsuit, and evidence ultimately disproved the claim. Still, it demonstrates how the absence of closure leads people to invent new identities for the missing aviator. Even more fantastic are the myths suggesting her plane was taken by forces beyond human explanation. From alien abduction to passage into a time slip. Such ideas highlight how Amelia's disappearance resonates with mystery on a cosmic scale. While these belong more to folklore than history, they underscore how her fate became larger than life, a canvas for imagination as much as investigation. These alternative explanations, though unlikely, serve an important role in the legend. They keep Amelia Earhart alive in cultural memory, constantly reborn in books, films, and documentaries. Her disappearance is no longer only a matter of aviation history. It has become a myth shaped by every generation that retells it. The truth may rest in a handful of plausible scenarios, but the allure of the extraordinary ensures that Amelia's story will always invite speculation far beyond the ordinary. Nearly a century has passed since Amelia Earhart's plane vanished into the vast Pacific skies. Yet her disappearance continues to echo across history. Whether she crashed at sea, lived briefly as a castaway, or fell victim to capture, one truth remains: her fate was never conclusively solved. That absence of closure transformed her from a pioneering aviator into a timeless legend, a symbol of both human achievement and human vulnerability. Amelia's story endures not only because of the mystery, but because of who she was. She shattered barriers in aviation, becoming the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic and inspiring countless others to dream beyond the limits society imposed. Her courage represented more than flight. It was the embodiment of daring to go further, of risking everything for exploration. Even in disappearance, she challenged the world to look deeper, to search, and to never accept easy answers. Theories will continue to emerge. New technologies may scan deeper ocean floors, satellites may map hidden atolls, and archives may still reveal forgotten documents. Perhaps one day, definitive proof will surface, a piece of wreckage, a log, or evidence that closes the chapter. But until then, Amelia Earhart remains suspended in history, her final flight a question written across the endless blue of the Pacific. What fascinates most is how her disappearance has become larger than the event itself. It is no longer just the story of one aviator. It is a mirror of humanity's endless quest for answers. Every generation asks anew, how can someone so famous, so determined, vanish without a trace? That haunting possibility reminds us of the limits of our knowledge and the fragility of our ventures into the unknown. And now, I'll turn the question to you. Which theory convinces you most? The crash at sea? The castaway on Nikumaroro? The capture by Japanese forces? Or something entirely different? Could Amelia's Electra still lie hidden beneath miles of ocean? Or did her story end on some forgotten island shore? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your perspective keeps this discussion alive, fueling the search for truth even after so many decades. If you've made it this far into the mystery, thank you for joining me on this journey into one of the greatest unsolved disappearances of the 20th century. If you enjoyed unraveling Amelia Earhart's story, don't forget to press the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss our next dive into history's most haunting enigmas. Until then, keep questioning, keep searching, and remember, mysteries don't die. They wait for us to uncover them.